35 years of restoring Ukrainian independence. High-ranking guests are arriving in Kyiv. In the morning, leaders from 6 European countries, Denmark, Norway, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, and Lithuania, as well as the German foreign minister, took part in the festivities marking Flag Day. Important words were spoken about the unwavering support for Ukraine. Hello to Moscow. In the week leading up to this, the Kremlin traditionally turns up the heat and starts spewing venom. So Putin couldn't hold back either, crawling out with his usual threats. But among them, the dictator does admit that Ukraine has set out to finish off the Russian economy and destroy its logistics. You can't hide the truth, so they need to show the Russians something before the Duma elections. There are no particular successes on the front, so they are striking peaceful cities. Absolutely savage strikes this week on a shopping center in Kryvyi Rih, hunting for minibuses in Zaporizhia, massive strikes on the Kyiv and Odessa regions. We really need missiles for Patriot systems. They are searching for them everywhere. The president of France also promises to help. Emmanuel Macron also confirmed his readiness to grant licenses for the production of French missiles. President Zelensky announced this on Saturday. It is obviously about the long-range Scalp cruise missiles. The issue of anti-ballistic missile licenses will, of course, also be discussed during meetings with distinguished foreign guests arriving in Ukraine for Independence Day. We will talk about all of this today, but we will start with how we are paving our own way to ending the war. Artem Pulyev reports on the main attacks on the enemy's rear.
The first ozone holes in Russia.
Everyone who said the ozone wouldn't be touched.
How the defense forces arrived with long-range sanctions at the second largest trading platform for Russian weapons.
Everything was logical, matter of time.
And also how they flipped the switch in Moscow.
For the first time, they're turning on the lights in Russia.
And a total blackout in Crimea.
Honestly, for 6 days, what happened? I don't understand.
What kind of response awaits Russia for the attacks on Ukraine?
Local frontline regions like Kursk, Belgorod, that's just easy.
A selection of the loudest strikes of the week, right now. The night leading into Saturday, Chapyevka in Russia's Samara region wakes up to the accompaniment of Ukrainian drones.
Whoa! Whoa!
And as soon as the sun rises, it's already blocked by a huge column of smoke.
You should go home.
More drones continue to reach their targets.
Huh? Detonation. Boom. Take that.
In June, the flowers started strikes on Russian oil refineries. In July, the wild berries from Wildberries. And in August,
Ozon's first warehouse is gone. It's burning to the ground, just so you understand.
after the Ukrainian Defense Forces took 7 of the largest warehouses of the Russian marketplace Wildberries out of the chat, now the good drones have also visited its main competitor.
In short, I liked it at Ozon. I didn't like it at all.
This was inevitable. It was just a matter of time, I'd say, before all this reached Ozon. And now, I am more than sure that we are next. We will see 10 to 15 strikes there. How Ozon itself will be burning?
And the next strike didn't keep us waiting long. The very next day, an Ozon warehouse caught fire in Orenburg. A huge blaze also reached St. Petersburg. Next to Ozon, another warehouse caught fire. Moreover, as the Russians themselves claim, even without the involvement of drones. But where will it burn brightly next? Local residents have already figured it out and are giving hints themselves.
Have you ever seen the size of the Ozon distribution warehouse located in Tumen? I'll show you right now. It's located along the Moscow tract.
These marketplaces sell not only household items, but also military-grade goods. Just like on Wildberries, you can find components for drones here. Engines, antennas, fiber optic spools, as well as body armor and helmets. In short, everything for the enemy's so-called SMO. Disrupting this supply chain is a key task for the defense forces. And another one is striking a Russian economy, which would really be like it's without oxygen, without Ozon.
I had over 7,000 items burned down at Wildberries. Today they started bombing Ozon, too. I'm just in shock. I don't know how I'm going to pay taxes and salaries to the seamstresses who are working at the production facility right now.
All these Companies, both Wildberries and Ozon, are very heavily leveraged. Their debt is measured in tens of billions of dollars, and now they obviously won't be able to service this debt, and this threatens the collapse of the Russian Federation's banking system. If the banking system doesn't work, that means huge inflation, and it means the inability to finance weapons production once again.
Along with this, Russians themselves are continuing to wake up to reality. The flames from the marketplaces bring a bunch of problems, and the first one is unemployment. Up to 70,000 workers were employed at the 7 destroyed Wildberries warehouses. And what now?
I've been looking for a job for a month, checking salaries. It turns out we were earning pretty well. And now it's very hard to find a job.
The situation with the Ukrainian strikes has obviously gotten under the Russian dictator's skin as well. Putin, of course, brushes it off and traditionally downplays the scale, but he has finally admitted there is a problem.
There are no consequences from such attacks. There haven't been, and there can't be. But they do cause us harm, of course. That is obvious. We understand this, and we see it, and we know it.
Obviously, the Kremlin understands. It's time to feed the population another fairy tale.
Before this, he's simply ignored the issue, meaning nothing's happening, everything's fine. The air conditioning in my bunker is working, everything is good, I'm living. But, well, it's impossible to hide the huge lines at the gas stations. It's impossible to hide the huge plumes of smoke when their logistics centers are burning down.
Just as it was impossible to hide one of the most powerful strikes on Moscow and the surrounding region this week. Dozens of such warm comments poured in overnight.
Photo! Boom! I've got it now. My legs are shaky.
It's one thing when Russians in the hinterlands wake up to the war, but it's a completely different thing when it happens in the capital.
I just can't wrap my head around the fact that my power was cut off.
It's just honestly so scary, you know, with everything that's happening right now. And I really do think this is just the beginning of all this shit. It's honestly terrifying.
Moscow Mayor Sobyanin reported on more than 600 Ukrainian drones that were heading toward the Russian capital, of which they shot down, according to official Russian data, only about 200. And this made even Kremlin propagandists nervous.
I have a question for our authorities. Why is it still flying over our country in such numbers?
But what a surprise it was for Muscovites when they woke up in the morning without electricity. Several districts of the Russian capital were plunged into darkness, trams stopped, and there wasn't even enough electricity for the escalators in the subway.
They're turning the lights on for the first time.
There were interruptions with the internet and communications due to the power outage at a major communication hub. Could this really be a test run for the Weir?
Indeed, our special operations forces are looking for bottlenecks, how Moscow can be plunged into a blackout. Because the question is that Moscow is, first of all, a city of 12 million people, and secondly, Moscow is surrounded by 48 power plants that keep Moscow running on cheap Russian gas.
To destroy the transformer areas near the power plants, a large number of drones is needed, and this task, obviously, our defense forces have accomplished. Just as it is clear that this is only the beginning.
Besides drones, we have Flamingo Neptunes. And besides that, we have a fire point stating that in the fall, there will already be the possibility, well, in September, there will already be the possibility to use ballistic missiles.
And in the temporarily occupied Crimea, a total blackout occurred this week. Previously, electricity here at least appeared occasionally in some places.
For the first time today, there was light all night. And since July 23rd, all night long. We hadn't had that happen before, but there isn't power throughout the whole city. I don't know, maybe they'll turn it off now and it'll be off until morning.
The peninsula's main power plants run on gas, which simply cannot be delivered here now.
We haven't had electricity since 11 p.m. and now there's no water either. I don't understand what happened. Did we take a wrong turn somewhere or what?
Crimeans are also slowly starting to wake up to reality because there are no tourists on the peninsula, just like there's no electricity.
We are looking at Azov, Pervini, Alushta, and finally, Penachus.
Their main goal right now is to build a power transmission line from the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant to the Kuban, and from the Kuban to Crimea. This is also a fairly difficult, important project.
So there won't be a quick solution here. And as a result, it's not just the locals who are on an electric starvation diet, but more importantly, the Russian troops and their radar stations, electronic warfare stations, and anti-aircraft missile systems.
If, let's say, there are some command posts, some repair substations, they can be powered by diesel generators. But when it comes to just stationary radars for those same S-300, S-400 systems, they consume hundreds of kilowatts. And that is exactly why this is being done, so that their radars don't work, so that we can carry out successful strikes on the locations of the Russian army in Crimea.
Cutting power to Crimea, key Russian military-industrial complex enterprises, and parts of Moscow is probably just a rehearsal before the main act. The Ukrainian Defense Forces may soon scale this operation to other territories of the invaders.
Local frontline regions like Kursk, Belgorod, that's just so easy for our special operations forces. A very decent target is the Leningrad region. That is a very decent target.
This week has shown Ukrainian strikes can be extremely painful for the occupiers. And this isn't just about the power switch or military production, but also about the economy that fuels the war. Additional pressure to force the enemy to stop, because they will have to choose between collapse and peace. Artem Pulia, Faktitizhna, ICTV, Yedini Novedy.
In the Kremlin, during excavations, well, they absolutely accidentally found the remains of Prince Dmitry Donsky, even though everyone had known perfectly well about his burial place for centuries. If the prince had known how this would end, he would have ordered his ashes to be scattered, because Putin immediately sent the prince's relics to the front to boost the morale of the occupiers. That's the kind of mobilization they have in Russia, as social media jokes. Well, and the next one, I don't know, obviously, will be Lenin.
But everyone is waiting for a different kind of mobilization. Will Putin dare to do it after the so-called State Duma elections? How might the historic meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping in the U.S., which will take place in September, influence his decision and the war as a whole? And what does the visit of former U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg to Ukraine this week mean? What message did he bring? Alexander Melnick analyzed the scenario.
The autumn negotiation season.
This is, without a doubt, the #1 issue for Donald Trump right now.
Will American envoys go to Putin?
Putin once again has the illusion that he can win the war.
What should Ukraine expect from the meeting between Trump and Xi?
China's not interested in the Kremlin falling.
And what did Trump's General Keith Kellogg come to us with on the eve of Independence Day? See all the scenarios for ending the war this geopolitical autumn coming up next. As soon as Independence Day approaches, former Trump Special Envoy Keith Kellogg immediately arrives in Ukraine. Someone we call our best air defense, since the shelling tends to quiet down during his visits. Only this time, his route didn't lead straight to Kyiv, but through the shelled ports of Odessa, perhaps to assess the resilience of our maritime gateways before the major negotiations.
For us, the main thing is that there are attempts to resume peace talks, at least regarding a sectoral ceasefire.
However, it is even more important for Kyiv to obtain anti-ballistic missile systems to protect both the ports and the energy sector ahead of winter. And so, who else but a friend of Ukraine could nudge Washington toward this? Although, in reality, Kiev was expecting people from Trump's inner circle more for Independence Day. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who are handling Trump's peace initiatives behind the scenes, rather than a retired general whose human shield magic failed in the Capitol this time.
Well, nothing apocalyptic happened. But nevertheless, well, if they don't come, it will mean that right now, the states are not ready for active steps towards ending the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Perhaps because the key cards of the Grand Bargain are currently being played at a completely different level in direct dialogue with Beijing, especially since Xi Jinping will arrive in the US for an official visit in September for the first time in 11 years. And here the main question arises: can Ukraine become part of a grand American-Chinese agreement?
Trump has already repeatedly appealed to Xi Jinping to influence Putin. There has been no result. Trump is not going to demand anything. Trump wants a balancing of interest with China right now.
And this is, perhaps, the key. But nevertheless, if Washington wants concessions from Beijing, Beijing will want something in return.
Now, the absolute priority is the war in Iran. And considering that it has a serious impact on the domestic, political, and economic situation, this is the #1 issue for Trump.
So, for Washington, Ukraine is currently far from the only and not even the main foreign policy concern. And for China, this situation is generally convenient. Beijing has already received quite a lot from Russia that Moscow was willing to concede for: cheap energy resources, markets, trade, and technological cooperation. And now it is advantageous for China not just to support Moscow, but to balance between Russia, Europe, and the USA. In other words, China's not interested in the Kremlin falling because it is giving up everything that can possibly be given up. But at the same time, China is absolutely not interested in the Kremlin winning. Therefore, China's game is not for Putin and not for Ukraine. It is for China.
Counting on China's position being at least neutral towards Ukraine, like, say, an honest broker, is also very unlikely. Considering that the Russian economy and the Russian war machine are only able to operate because they receive such help from China, both through energy resource purchases, direct assistance with components, and many other things.
And so, to expect that Beijing will suddenly become an honest broker for Ukraine is naive. The Russian economy and war machine are largely sustained by Chinese purchases, energy resources, and components. So the question is no longer just whether China can pressure Putin, but what exactly Beijing will want to get in return for that pressure.
China is currently the absolute beneficiary. And in principle, it hasn't really suffered much economically either. Diplomatically, it's completely, well, let's say, China should be completely satisfied. And it is, of course, interested, by the way, just like Russia, in having the United States get even more bogged down in this war so that they deplete their military, let's say military stockpiles, the stockpiles of that weaponry that we need even more.
And this is the main risk for us. In this game, Ukraine is formally not sitting at the negotiating table of Trump and Xi. But it is precisely Ukraine that might be discussed at this table, since Washington is looking for simple solutions. And the plan that the Americans are striving to impose on the Kremlin is no longer a secret. This is an attempt to stop hostilities where the troops are currently standing.
Therefore, the main thing is to try to draw Russia into the negotiation process. As of today, only the Americans are capable of this, because in the Kremlin, especially Putin himself, and not just Putin, they are interested in negotiations with Trump. In my opinion, the simplest idea, and we need to return to it, is a ceasefire along the front line, or a phased de-escalation of the war.
But the Kremlin is not yet ready for a freeze, and here is an important detail. Russia is entering its political autumn. In September, just 4 days before the meeting between Trump and Xi, they will hold so-called State Duma elections, where even the only anti-war party, Yabloko, had its registration canceled by the Supreme Court.
Each of you has a chance to change the course of history, restore peace, and save people's lives.
The party quickly gained an almost fantastic 9% support, which became a real nightmare for the Kremlin. After all, before the Trump-Xi talks, Putin needs a myth about absolute support for the war and society.
This danger in the case of Yabloko, it is...
And this danger in the case of Yabloko, of course, was not that Yabloko would go and win the election. There was no such possibility, and no one thought so. It disrupts the picture of unanimity in parliament, and in itself shows the impotence of the authorities. In other words, the Kremlin doesn't even want the image of dissent, because after the September elections, it might move on to a new wave of mobilization. President Volodymyr Zelensky is talking about plans to recruit hundreds of thousands of people, and even if it isn't officially announced, the process has already begun.
If there is, even if it's limited, well, within the range of 300,000 to 500,000 people who could be mobilized, but still, it's an additional mobilization, well then yes, that's a new stage of escalation in the war. Putin once again has the illusion that he can win the war precisely through ballistic strikes on Ukraine. That's the situation, and I think it's unlikely to change in the next 6 months.
In short, while the world talks about negotiations, Russia is actively preparing for a new round of the war.
3 cheers. Hooray, hooray, hooray.
So, autumn may indeed become a season of major geopolitical bargaining, with Trump seeking a deal, Xi seeking benefits, Putin seeking a pause, and Ukraine seeking a just peace and ironclad guarantees. And while the great powers play their geopolitical game, we continue to play ours with our long-range weapons. Alexander Melnik, Fakty Tygodnia, ICTV, United News.
The defense forces are doing their job thoroughly. Recently, they have taken on the enemy's space industry and are methodically taking out Roscosmos facilities. Why is this a matter of principle for us? Sophia Cholis will break it all down.
Stopping Rosvet. How did one precise strike blind the enemy?
There were missiles were hit that were located on launch vehicles that were in the middle and final stages of production.
And it set the Russian rocket and space industry back by years. Why can such long-range hooks completely disarm the Russians?
It won't be possible, to just patch up the holes in the ceiling, right? And then continue after that?
And what are the next targets already on the Defense Forces radar? Unique footage. Practically right under the enemy's nose, fighters from the 132nd Separate Reconnaissance Battalion of the Air Assault Forces are creeping right up to the invaders' positions. This video was filmed in the spring of this year in the Oleksandrivka direction at the junction of the Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia regions. The enemy couldn't even imagine such audacity. And the fact that a similar situation could soon repeat itself in other sectors of the front? The Ukrainian Flamingo spreads its wings over the Russian rear and sets a course for the Samara Rocket and Space Center Progress, an object that the Kremlin still considered untouchable.
We are in a unique place. This is the very heart of the Rocket and Space Center.
It feels like they are preparing for a surgical operation here. This is the so-called clean room, a super high-tech and unique workshop for the final assembly of rocket carrier engines.
In special suits so that a human hair or, a flake of dandruff from hair doesn't get onto the equipment. There are indeed such workshops in the space industry where high-purity air is required, even in these workshops. And 2 missiles hit there.
Now, sterility is the last thing on anyone's mind here. The aftermath of the strike is visible even from space. But the main thing isn't even that, but the fact that they were assembling the Kremlin's key hope for the war of the future here.
It was at this very enterprise that the R-7 was produced, which carried out the very first space launches ever. The R-7 was already converted into the Soyuz launch vehicle, and its evolution was being produced up until today. In other words, there is no such equipment anywhere else. And after this, well, the Russian Federation is truly left without its main launch vehicle for just launching into space.
Plesetsk Cosmodrome, February 2025, launch of the Soyuz-2 rocket. Russia's main ticket to space, which carried military satellites, spacecraft, and new communication devices into orbit. It was on Soyuz-2 rockets that the Kremlin planned to deploy its own equivalent of Starlink. The secret project Razvet from the company Bureau 14040.
If the Russians fully organize this Razvet system and create a satellite constellation, we will have a huge number of problems. For instance, Shaheds will fly under control over this territory of Ukraine. And besides that, the Russian armed forces will get stable communication of Starlink quality.
In March of this year, the Russians launched the first 16 Razvets into low Earth orbit. The plan was for Moscow to supplement them with hundreds more satellites in the coming years to provide the invading army in the trenches with high-speed, uninterrupted, and secure communication. And not only that, but without the Samara-Soyuz rockets, all this Rosvet turns into utter darkness.
Everything comes down not just to hardware, but to communication. After all, without communication, you're blind, deaf, and vulnerable.
Of course, the Kremlin will try to create the illusion that nothing catastrophic has happened and will attempt to conduct another launch from Plesets in the near future. But
that won't mean that everything is okay for him. That's just the rocket that was already directly at the launch site.
And rockets are just one part of the Russians' global problem. Satellites can fly beautifully in space, but their heart and ears lie on the ground. And this is a critically vulnerable detail that our drones simply couldn't help but notice.
The work is not just set up, it's moving at such a good pace.
The pace of our defense forces is truly remarkable. Over the last few weeks, there has been a whole series of accurate strikes that are literally burning out the Russian space eyes. The Progress plant, and shortly before that, 2 more space communication centers in the Vladimir and Moscow regions. Even earlier, there were targets in occupied Crimea near Yevpatoria and Alushta. This is what the Dubna Center looked like until recently. It was from here that the Russians used satellites to coordinate their troops on the front line. But our birds have made some adjustments here in the Moscow region. As a result, the invaders have deep blind spots in their army's command and control system, and this is just the beginning.
The chain of access to space, which Russia had, however imperfect, is being destroyed in order to deprive them, so to speak, of the eyes needed for planning long-range strike operations against Ukraine from the Russian Federation. We are taking out their space communication centers.
And without this, the Russians will be toothless, because their recovery will take a lot of time.
This isn't just a few trucks driving out into a field, setting up tents and starting space communication with a space constellation. No, this requires stationary antennas, meaning a ton of equipment that has to be high precision.
And there are quite a few of these facilities on the map. A lot. Quite a few. In Samara itself, there's the Kuznetsov plant, which produces rocket engines for the Soyuz rockets, the Polyat Production Association in Omsk, where they assemble the Angara rockets, and finally, the very spaceports from which they are watched.
I specifically measured the distance from the border from the Chernihiv region to Plesets. It's less than 1,300 kilometers. That is, it's a distance that both our drones and our cruise missiles are capable of covering.
But let's return to the footage you saw at the beginning. The Russians look so helpless after their access to the Starlink network was blocked. This instantly paralyzed their command and control and allowed our assault troops to clear hundreds of square kilometers of Ukrainian land in a matter of days. The enemy still cannot recover from such a systemic shock. But as they say, there is more to come.
A great many things depend on the Russian Federation's ability to launch things into space. Their intelligence depends on it, missile attack warnings depend on it, communications depend on it, and navigation depends on it. Without satellite intelligence and signals intelligence, they remain, well, without the ability to effectively plan their operations and their strikes.
The Progress plant and the centers in Dubna and Vladimir are just the tip of the iceberg. The defense forces clearly identify the enemy's most vulnerable pain points in order to destroy their ability to wage war at the root.
1,500 enterprises that need to be destroyed on the territory of the Russian Federation. Now, if we're talking about the use of Iskanders, well, let's recall that we have struck both the production of Iskanders directly and the production of their launchers. So the main task is to look at any weapon, evaluate where the weak point is, theoretically, and destroy that point in order to ruin the enemy's further capability.
The enemy thought they could wage a war of the future from space, but Ukrainian strikes are methodically returning the Russian army to the Stone Age, where there is no communication, navigation, or extra eyes. And the next explosion in this system is just a matter of time. Sophia Chola, Saturday of the Week, ICTV, United News.